Every child speaks when they're ready. Just be patient. That's what the healers told Alpha King Roman Terry, when his son remained silent year after year. But Roman would learn that silence isn't always about readiness. Sometimes it's about waiting for the right person to break through the walls that trauma builds. And when his 5-year-old son finally spoke, it wasn't to him. It wasn't to any of the nobles who'd tried to coax words from the boy's lips. It was to the lowly Omega servant everyone ignored, the one Roman had barely noticed until his son ran to her, wrapped his small arms around her legs, and whispered the word that would shatter everything Roman thought he knew about strength, worth, and love. Mommy. Chapter 1. The Silent Heir. The throne room of the Silvercrest pack smelled of old wood and older power. Roman Terry sat upon the carved seat his ancestors had occupied for 7 generations. His jaw tight as he watched the latest specialist kneel before him. This one was a traveling healer from the Eastern Territories, a wizened woman with silver braids and promises that sounded identical to all the others. "Your Majesty," she said, her voice raspy with age. "I've treated hundreds of cases like your son's. With the right herbs and my guidance." That's what the last 5 healers said. Roman's voice cut through her pitch like a blade through silk. "My son is 5 years old. He has never spoken a single word, not one syllable, not even a cry when he was born." The healer's confidence flickered. "But surely he makes sounds. Laughter, whimpers, nothing." Roman stood, his massive frame casting shadows across the stone floor. As Alpha King, he'd faced down rival packs, negotiated treaties, and killed rogues with his bare hands. But his son's silence was an enemy he couldn't fight. He understands everything, follows commands, reads at a level beyond his years, but he won't or can't speak. Then perhaps, leave. Roman's beta, Harold Walls, stepped forward. "The king has heard enough theories." The healer gathered her skirts and scurried out, leaving Roman alone with Harold and the weight of his failures. "Another one bites the dust," Harold muttered. "That's what, 17 specialists now? 19. Roman moved to the window overlooking the pack grounds. Below, children played in the courtyard, their laughter drifting up like mockery. His son, Toby, sat apart from them as always, building something intricate with wooden blocks. Alone. Silent. Different. "The council is getting restless," Harold said carefully. "Some are questioning whether Toby can truly be your heir if he can't." "Can't what? Speak?" Roman's eyes flashed gold, his wolf rising at the perceived threat to his child. "My son is brilliant. He's memorized every territorial map in my study. He can identify every herb in the healer's garden. He plays chess like a strategist twice his age. His silence doesn't make him weak." "I know that. You know that." Harold spread his hands. "But the council sees a future king who can't address his pack, can't issue commands, can't negotiate with other alphas. They're starting to whisper about your brother." Roman's hands clenched into fists. His younger brother, Greg Donnelly, adopted into the Terry line but blood-hungry for power all the same. Greg had been circling like a vulture since Toby's condition became apparent, making friends among the council, planting seeds of doubt. "Toby is my heir," Roman said flatly. "Anyone who suggests otherwise can challenge me directly." "No one's going to challenge you, Roman. You're the strongest alpha we've had in generations." Harold moved closer, his voice dropping. "But they don't need to challenge you, they just need to wait. If something happened to you before Toby can speak, before he can lead, the pack would never accept a mute king. They'd turn to Greg." The truth of it sat in Roman's chest like a stone. He'd spent 5 years trying everything: healers, therapists, even a witch from the northern covens who'd claimed Toby was cursed. Nothing worked. His son remained locked in silence, and Roman was running out of time to find the key. "Have them bring Toby to my study," Roman said finally. "I want to work with him on the treaty documents. If he can't speak, he'll learn to lead in other ways." Harold nodded and left. Roman stayed at the window, watching his son below. Toby had finished his block structure, a perfect replica of the pack house, complete with tiny carved windows. The boy's mind was extraordinary. His voice was just missing. A flash of movement caught Roman's eye. One of the Omega servants was crossing the courtyard, her arms full of linens. She moved quickly, head down, trying to be invisible as all Omegas did in the presence of their betters. But Toby's head lifted. He watched her pass with an intensity Roman had never seen in his son's usually distant gaze. The Omega, what was her name? Celeste? No. Celeste worked in the kitchen. This one was newer. Diane? Yes. Diane Fleming. She'd been assigned to the servant quarters about 6 months ago. Roman barely remembered her arrival. Omegas came and went. They were meant to be invisible, functional, forgettable, but Toby was staring at her like she was the most fascinating thing he'd ever seen. Strange. Roman dismissed it. Toby often fixated on random things, a bird's flight pattern, the way sunlight hit the water fountain. It meant nothing. He turned from the window, unaware that he'd just witnessed the first crack in his son's carefully constructed walls. Diane Fleming knew how to be invisible. It was the first lesson every Omega learned. Don't make eye contact with alphas. Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't exist in any way that might draw attention. In a pack ruled by the powerful, Omegas were meant to be shadows necessary but unnoticed. She hurried across the courtyard, her arms aching under the weight of the linens she was bringing to the guest quarters. The head housekeeper, Priscilla Hendricks, would have her hide if she took too long. Priscilla ran the servant staff with an iron fist, and she had no patience for Omegas who didn't know their place. Diane kept her eyes on the ground, but she felt the weight of a stare on her back. She risked a quick glance, and saw him, the little prince, Toby, sitting alone with his blocks. His dark eyes were fixed on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. She'd seen the Alpha King's son before, of course. Everyone in the pack knew about the boy who couldn't speak. Some called it a curse. Others said his mother's death in childbirth had stolen his voice. The more superstitious whispered that he wasn't really the king's son at all, that some dark magic had replaced the true heir with this silent changeling. Diane didn't believe in curses. She believed in trauma. She knew what it looked like when a child built walls so high that even their own voice couldn't escape. She'd seen it in the mirror for years after her own childhood shattered. She'd been 7 when rogues attacked her birth pack, killing her parents and leaving her orphaned. She'd stopped speaking for 2 years afterward. The silence had felt safer than words, because words meant feeling, and feeling meant remembering, and remembering meant breaking. She'd found her voice again eventually, but she recognized the look in Toby's eyes. He wasn't broken. He was protecting himself from something none of the healers or specialists could identify. Move along, Omega. A sharp voice cut through her thoughts. Priscilla stood at the servant entrance, her face pinched with disapproval. The linens don't deliver themselves. Yes, ma'am. Diane ducked her head and hurried inside, but not before catching one last glimpse of Toby. He was still watching her, his small hand raised in what might have been a wave. She smiled despite herself, then disappeared into the shadows where Omegas belonged. That night, Roman sat in his study with Toby, trying to engage the boy in the territorial maps spread across the massive oak desk. Toby's small finger traced the boundaries with perfect accuracy, his eyes absorbing every detail. But when Roman asked him a question, "Can you show me where the Eastern Border Patrol should focus?" Toby simply pointed. No words, never words. Roman sighed and rubbed his temples. You're brilliant, Toby. You know that, right? Toby looked at him with those 2 old eyes and nodded once. Then why won't you talk to me? Roman's voice cracked despite himself. I'm your father. I'd do anything for you. Anything. Just give me one word, please. Toby's expression didn't change. He reached for the quill on the desk and wrote in careful letters, I can't. Can't or won't. Roman tried to keep the frustration from his voice. Toby wrote again, don't know. Roman wanted to push harder, to demand answers, to force the words from his son's throat through sheer willpower. But he'd tried that before. It only made Toby retreat further into his silence. All right, Roman said softly. All right, we'll figure it out together. Toby nodded and returned to the maps, his small shoulders relaxing slightly. Roman watched him and felt the familiar ache of helplessness. His son was right there in front of him. Close enough to touch, but separated by a gulf Roman couldn't cross. If something happened to me tomorrow, Roman thought, who would protect him? Who would fight for his right to rule? Who would love him enough to break through that silence? He had no answers, only the growing certainty that time was running out. Chapter 2. The Unseen Connection. Diane learned the rhythms of the pack house quickly. Wake before dawn, scrub the floors in the east wing, prepare linens for the guest quarters, serve meals in the servants' hall, polish silver in the kitchens, collapse into her narrow bed after midnight. Repeat. It was grueling work, but she didn't complain. Omegas who complained didn't last long in the Silvercrest pack. What she hadn't expected was the boy. Toby started appearing wherever she worked. At first, she thought it was coincidence. She'd be sweeping the corridor outside the library, and he'd be there, sitting on the window seat with a book. She'd be folding linens in the courtyard, and he'd be building his block structures nearby. She'd be carrying water to the guest rooms, and he'd be standing in the hallway, watching her with those dark, fathomless eyes. After a week of this, she realized it wasn't coincidence at all. He was following her. "You need to stop," Priscilla hissed one morning, grabbing Diane's arm hard enough to bruise. "The prince is shadowing you, and people are noticing. Do you know what happens to Omegas who draw the attention of the royal family?" Diane kept her eyes down. "I haven't done anything. I don't even speak to him." "You don't need to speak to him. Your existence is enough." Priscilla's fingernails dug deeper. Alpha King Roman is already under pressure about his son. If he thinks some Omega is distracting the boy, he'll have you thrown out. Or worse. "I'll stay away from him," Diane promised. Even though she knew it was impossible, she didn't seek Toby out, he found her. And she couldn't exactly tell the prince to leave her alone. Omegas didn't give orders to royalty, but Priscilla was right about one thing. People were noticing. "The Omega girl," Greg Donnelly said, swirling wine in his crystal glass. "The one who works in the linens. What's her name?" His companion, Kenneth Schwartz, one of the council members, leaned back in his chair. They were in Greg's private chambers, away from prying eyes and ears. "Diane something. Fleming, I think." "Why?" "Because my dear nephew won't leave her alone." Greg smiled, but there was nothing warm in it. "He follows her around like a lost puppy. It's almost touching." Kenneth frowned. "The boy doesn't interact with anyone." "Are you sure?" "I've seen it myself. This morning, he was sitting outside the laundry room for an hour, just watching her fold sheets." Greg set down his glass. "The question is, why? Does it matter? He's a child. Children do strange things. Everything matters when you're trying to prove a point." Greg stood and walked to the window. Below, he could see the courtyard where Toby often played. The council is already questioning whether a mute boy can rule. If they think he's becoming attached to an Omega, of all things, it'll only reinforce their doubts. Kenneth caught on quickly. "You want to use this against him?" "I want to use everything against him." Greg's voice hardened. "Roman has held the throne for 12 years. 12 years of his rigid leadership, his refusal to expand our territory, his weakness disguised as diplomacy. The pack deserves better. They deserve strength. They deserve you, you mean?" "Of course I mean me." Greg turned back to Kenneth. "But I need the council's support, and the best way to get that is to prove that Toby isn't fit to be heir. A mute prince who fixates on Omega servants. That's not a future king. That's a liability." Kenneth nodded slowly. "What do you need from me?" "Watch them. Document every interaction. And when the time is right, we'll present our concerns to the council. For the good of the pack, naturally." "Naturally." Kenneth stood. "Consider it done." After he left, Greg poured himself another glass of wine and smiled. Roman thought his son's silence was his biggest problem. He had no idea that the real threat was just beginning to take shape. Diane was polishing silver in the kitchen when Toby appeared in the doorway. She didn't notice him at first. She was focused on removing a particularly stubborn tarnish from a serving platter. But when she looked up, he was standing there, holding something in his small hands. Her breath caught. She glanced around quickly. The kitchen was empty. The cook and her assistants had gone to the market. They were alone. "Your Highness," she said softly, setting down the platter. "You shouldn't be here. If someone sees you talking to me..." She stopped. Talking. He didn't talk. That was the whole problem, wasn't it? Toby stepped closer and held out what he was carrying. It was a book, a children's story about a wolf who couldn't howl. Diane recognized it from the library shelf she dusted every week. "You want me to read to you?" she asked gently. Toby nodded, his eyes hopeful. Diane's heart twisted. She should say no. She should send him away, protect herself from whatever consequences this might bring. But the look on his face, the desperate hope of a child who'd been failed by every adult in his life, broke through her defenses. "All right," she whispered, "but just for a few minutes. And we have to be quick." Toby's whole face lit up. He climbed onto the wooden stool next to her and opened the book, pointing to the first page. Diane began to read. Her voice was soft, meant only for his ears. The story was simple: a young wolf who couldn't make sounds like the rest of his pack, who felt broken and alone until he discovered he could communicate through actions instead. Help instead of howls. Kindness instead of calls. As she read, she felt Toby lean against her shoulder. The weight of him was slight but significant. When was the last time someone had simply held this child? The king was busy ruling. The servants were too afraid. The other pack children avoided him because he was different. He was so terribly alone. Diane finished the story and closed the book. Did you like it? Toby nodded vigorously. Then he did something that made her breath stop. He pointed to her, then to himself, then to his heart. You understand me, the gesture said. You see me. Tears pricked Diane's eyes. I do see you, she whispered. You're not broken, Toby. You're just waiting for the right time, the right person, the right moment. Toby looked at her with an intensity that seemed too old for his 5 years. Then he reached out and took her hand, squeezing it gently. The kitchen door swung open. Diane jerked back, her heart hammering. But it was only Joe Shelton, one of the younger Omega servants, carrying a basket of vegetables. Oh! Joe stopped short, her eyes widening. I didn't know, Your Highness. Toby slipped off the stool, clutching his book. He looked at Diane one more time, his expression torn between fear and longing, then ran from the kitchen. Joe set down her basket slowly. Diane, what was that? Nothing, Diane said quickly, returning to her silver polishing with shaking hands. He just wanted someone to read to him. You can't do that. You know you can't. Joe's voice was gentle but urgent. Priscilla already has her eye on you. If she finds out you're spending time alone with the prince. I know. Diane scrubbed harder at the platter, trying to erase the feel of Toby's small hand in hers. It won't happen again. But even as she said it, she knew it was a lie. Because when Toby had looked at her, she'd seen herself at 7 years old. Silent, scared, desperate for someone to understand. And she couldn't turn away from that. Not even to save herself. Joe sighed. Just be careful, please. The powerful eat people like us for breakfast, and they don't even notice the taste. That night, Roman found Toby in his room, reading by candlelight, the same book about the wolf who couldn't howl. Roman had bought it months ago, hoping it might resonate with his son. Toby had never shown interest in it before. New favorite? Roman asked, sitting on the edge of Toby's bed. Toby nodded, clutching the book to his chest. What made you pick it up today? Toby hesitated, then pulled out the small chalkboard he used to communicate. He wrote, Someone read it to me. Roman's eyebrows rose. Who? Toby's hand hovered over the board. Then he erased the words without answering. Toby. Roman kept his voice calm despite the sudden tension in his chest. Who read to you? But Toby just shook his head and dove under his covers, the book still pressed against him like a shield. Roman wanted to press, to demand answers. But he recognized the signs of Toby shutting down, push too hard, and the boy would retreat completely. All right, Roman said softly. Keep your secrets. For now. He kissed Toby's forehead and left, his mind spinning. Someone had reached his son. Someone had made Toby interested in a story about finding your voice. That was progress, real, tangible progress. But who? Roman made a mental note to ask Harold to increase monitoring of Toby's daily movements. Not to punish whoever it was, but to understand. If someone had found a way to connect with his son, Roman needed to know how. Maybe, just maybe, they'd found the key to unlocking Toby's silence. He had no idea that the key was an Omega he'd never bothered to notice. And that by the time he figured it out, everything would have already changed. Chapter 3. The Fracture. Roman noticed the change in his son immediately. Over the next 2 weeks, Toby became lighter, not happier. Exactly. The boy still didn't smile much. Still didn't speak, but something had shifted. He moved with more purpose. His eyes held less of that distant, hollow quality. He even started sleeping through the night without the nightmares that usually woke him screaming silently into his pillow. He's improving, Harold observed during their morning briefing. Have you found a new specialist? No. Roman shuffled through reports on his desk, distracted. I haven't brought anyone new in for weeks. Then what changed? Roman didn't have an answer. But he was determined to find one. He started paying closer attention to Toby's routines. The boy still spent hours in the library, still built his intricate structures in the courtyard, still took meals in his room rather than the formal dining hall. But there was a pattern emerging, a specific time each day, when Toby would disappear for exactly 30 minutes. Between 2 and 2:30 in the afternoon, Toby would vanish. Roman decided to follow him. Diane had broken every rule she'd ever learned about surviving as an Omega. She met Toby in secret every day now. Always in different locations: the storage room behind the library, the empty guard tower on the eastern wall, the old greenhouse that no one used anymore. Toby would find her during her brief break period, clutching whatever book he wanted her to read, and she would spend 30 precious minutes giving him what no one else seemed capable of: simple, uncomplicated attention. She didn't try to make him talk. She didn't treat him like he was broken. She just read to him, and sometimes told him stories from her own childhood, carefully edited versions that left out the worst parts. The rogue attack, the blood, the silence that followed. And then, she said softly, sitting cross-legged in the greenhouse while Toby arranged smooth stones into patterns, the Omega discovered she could speak again. Not because someone forced her, not because a healer cast a spell, but because she met someone who made her feel safe enough to try. Toby looked up from his stones, his dark eyes questioning. "It's true," Diane continued. "When I was 7, I stopped talking for 2 whole years. Everyone tried to fix me. Healers, pack elders, even an alpha who thought scaring me would shock the words back into my throat. Nothing worked." Toby moved closer, abandoning his stones. "Then I met another Omega girl. She was 9, and she'd lost her voice too, not from trauma, but from a sickness that damaged her throat. She couldn't speak at all, but she taught me hand signs, ways to communicate without words. And one day, I realized I didn't need to be afraid anymore. The silence had protected me when I needed it, but I didn't need it anymore." Diane reached out and gently touched Toby's small hand. "Your silence is protecting you from something. I don't know what. But when you're ready, when you feel safe enough, your voice will come back. I promise." Toby's eyes filled with tears. He threw his arms around her neck, holding on like she was the only solid thing in a world that kept shifting beneath his feet. Diane held him back, her heart breaking and healing at the same time. "You're not broken," she whispered into his dark hair. "You're just waiting, and that's okay." She didn't hear the footsteps approaching the greenhouse, didn't sense the presence watching from the doorway until it was too late. "So this is where you disappear to?" Diane's blood turned to ice. She looked up to see Alpha King Roman Terry standing in the entrance, his massive frame blocking the sunlight. His expression was unreadable, not angry, not pleased, just assessing. Toby pulled back from her embrace but didn't move away. His small body was tense, ready to flee. "Your Majesty." Diane scrambled to her feet, dropping into a submissive bow. Her mind raced with explanations, excuses, anything that might save her from whatever punishment was coming. This isn't, how long?" Roman's voice was calm, which somehow made it worse. "I'm sorry? How long has my son been meeting you in secret?" Diane's throat closed. She couldn't lie to an alpha. The command in his voice wouldn't allow it. 2 weeks, she whispered. "Just 30 minutes a day. I read to him. That's all. I swear I never—" "What's your name?" "Diane Fleming, Your Majesty." Roman studied her for a long moment. She kept her eyes down, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. This was it. He was going to exile her. Or worse. "Look at me." She forced herself to meet his gaze. His eyes were the color of amber, sharp and intelligent. They reminded her of Toby's, but harder. More guarded. "You're the Omega from the linens," Roman said slowly, pieces clicking together. "The one Toby watches in the courtyard. I never encouraged him, Your Majesty. He just started following me, and I didn't know how to stop." Roman held up a hand. Then he did something that shocked her into silence. He knelt down to Toby's level. "Is this where you've been going, to see her?" Toby nodded, his jaw set with defiance. "Why?" Toby pointed to Diane, then to his heart, then made a gesture of opening a door. Roman's expression softened slightly. "She makes you feel safe." Another nod. Roman stood, his gaze returning to Diane. She braced herself for the order to leave, to never come near Toby again. But instead, he said something that made her world tilt sideways. "Teach me. Teach me." Diane blinked. "I'm sorry? Whatever you're doing that makes him trust you, teach me how to do it. Roman's voice held an edge of desperation he was trying to hide. I'm his father. I should be the one he runs to. But he runs to you instead. Why? The question hung in the air like a blade. Diane knew she was on dangerous ground. Telling an Alpha King that he was failing his son could get her killed. But something in Roman's eyes, the raw vulnerability beneath the power, made her brave. Because I don't try to fix him, she said quietly. I just accept him. Exactly as he is. Roman's jaw tightened. I accept him. Do you? Diane's voice was barely a whisper, but the words cut deep. Or do you accept the son you hope he'll become once he finally speaks? The silence that followed was deafening. Roman's eyes flashed gold, his wolf rising to the surface, angry at the challenge. Diane dropped her gaze immediately, cursing herself for overstepping. She'd just signed her own death warrant. But Roman didn't lash out. Instead, his shoulders sagged slightly, the fight draining from him. You think I don't love my son? I think you love him so much that his silence terrifies you, Diane said carefully, still not looking at him directly. And he can feel that fear. Children always can. Roman was quiet for so long that Diane risked another glance at his face. He was staring at Toby with an expression of such profound pain that she had to look away. I don't know how to reach him, Roman admitted, his voice rough. I've tried everything. Every healer, every specialist, every technique. Nothing works. He just pulls further away. Maybe that's the problem, Diane said softly. You're trying to pull him toward you. But what if you need to go to where he is instead? Roman looked at her sharply. What do you mean? His silence is his safe place. You can't drag him out of it. You have to enter it with him. Learn to communicate the way he does. Show him that you love him even if he never speaks another word. But he will speak, Roman said firmly. He has to. He's going to be king. And there it was, the real issue beneath everything else. No offense, Your Majesty, Diane said, knowing she was crossing lines that could never be uncrossed. But maybe that's not what Toby needs to hear right now. Maybe he needs to know that he's enough as he is. That his worth isn't tied to his ability to rule or command or meet everyone's expectations. Maybe he needs to just be a 5-year-old boy who's allowed to be silent. Roman's hands clenched into fists. For a moment Diane thought she'd gone too far, but then something in his expression cracked open, not anger but realization. Painful, unwanted realization. You think I'm hurting him, Roman said quietly. You think my expectations are the reason he won't speak. I think trauma is complicated, Diane said carefully. And I think pressure, even loving pressure, can make someone retreat further into themselves. He knows you need him to talk. He can feel the weight of that need every time you look at him. What if he's afraid that if he speaks, and it's not enough, he'll disappoint you? Roman closed his eyes. When he opened them again, they were suspiciously bright. I would never. I know. But does he? The question landed like a physical blow. Roman turned to his son, who was watching the exchange with wide, frightened eyes. Toby. Come here. Toby hesitated, then slowly walked to his father. Roman knelt again and pulled the boy into his arms. I love you, Roman said, his voice thick with emotion. Speech or no speech, crown or no crown. You are my son, and you are enough. Do you understand me? You are enough. Toby buried his face in Roman's chest, his small shoulders shaking. And though no sound emerged, Diane could see that he was crying great. Silent sobs that racked his entire body. Roman held him tighter, rocking slightly. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I've been so focused on fixing you that I forgot to just love you. Diane felt her own eyes burning. She started to back away, to give them privacy. But Roman's voice stopped her. Stay. She froze. Please, Roman added, looking at her over Toby's head. He trusts you. And right now, I need all the help I can get. It was the most vulnerable she'd ever seen in Alpha. The most human. Okay, Diane whispered. I'll stay. She didn't know it yet. But that single word okay would change everything. For Toby, for Roman, for the entire pack, and for her. Chapter 4, The Unexpected Arrangement. The arrangement Roman proposed was unprecedented. You'll move into the palace wing, he said that evening, after Toby had finally cried himself into exhausted sleep in Diane's arms. They were in Roman's private study now, the fire crackling in the hearth while rain pattered against the windows. You'll have a room near Toby's quarters. Your official title will be, what? Companion? Tutor? Diane sat stiffly in the chair across from his desk, still unable to believe this was happening. Your Majesty, I don't think. Nursemaid, Roman decided, ignoring her protest. That's respectable enough. You'll be responsible for Toby's daily care and education. The council won't question it, every royal child has had nursemaids. But I'm an Omega. Diane's voice was barely audible. Omegas don't serve in the royal quarters, it's not done. It is now. Roman's tone left no room for argument. My son trusts you. In 5 years, no one, not healers, not tutors, not even me has been able to reach him the way you have. Whatever you're doing, it's working. I'd be a fool to let that go. Diane's mind whirled. Moving into the palace wing meant leaving the servants' quarters, where at least she understood the rules. It meant being visible to the nobles, the council members, the very people who believed Omegas existed only to serve and submit. It meant painting a target on her back. The other Omegas will hate me, she said quietly. They'll think I'm trying to rise above my station. Let them think what they want. You'll be under my protection. Roman leaned forward, his amber eyes intense. Toby needs you, Diane. And I'm asking you to help him. Will you? It wasn't really a question. When an Alpha King asks something, especially something phrased as a request, refusing wasn't truly an option. But the way Roman looked at her, not with command but with desperate hope, made her realize he was genuinely giving her a choice. She thought of Toby's small arms around her neck, his silent tears. The way he looked at her like she was the only person in the world who understood him. Yes, she said. I'll help him. Relief flooded Roman's features. Thank you. But I have conditions. The words were out before she could stop them. Roman's eyebrows rose, and Diane's heart stuttered. Had she really just tried to negotiate with the Alpha King? Conditions. Roman repeated slowly. An Omega is setting conditions. Diane's wolf whimpered at the authority in his voice, urging her to submit, to apologize, to back down, but she forced herself to meet his gaze. If I'm going to help Toby, I need you to trust me. That means no more specialists unless I agree they're necessary. No more pressure on him to speak. And you have to let me do this my way. Roman's expression was unreadable. The silence stretched so long that Diane was certain she'd just destroyed any chance of helping Toby. Then impossibly, Roman smiled. You have courage, he said, more than most of my warriors. All right. Your conditions are accepted. But I have one of my own. What is it? You report to me. Every day. Tell me what's working, what's not, how Toby is progressing. Roman's voice softened. Teach me how to be the father he needs. Because right now, I'm failing him, and I can't accept that. The vulnerability in those words cracked something open in Diane's chest. This wasn't just an Alpha King trying to secure his heir. This was a father desperate to connect with his son. I'll teach you, she promised. But you have to be patient. This won't happen overnight. I've waited 5 years, Roman said. I can wait longer if it means getting my son back. The news spread through the pack house like wildfire. By morning, every servant knew that the Omega from the linens had been promoted to royal nursemaid. By midday, every noble in the palace was whispering about it. And by evening, the council had called an emergency meeting. An Omega? Councilman Kenneth Schwartz's voice dripped with disdain. In the royal quarters? Serving the heir to the throne? Roman stood before the council chambers, his posture rigid with authority. Harold stood beside him, ready to defend his Alpha's decision. The 7 council members sat in their high-backed chairs, their expressions ranging from confused to openly hostile. She's qualified, Roman said evenly. She has experience with children who've experienced trauma. And most importantly, my son trusts her. Your son is 5 years old. Another councilman, Javier Cohen, interjected. Children trust easily. That doesn't mean we should elevate a servant to such a position of influence. Diane Fleming is not just any servant. Roman's voice hardened. She's the first person in 5 years to make real progress with Toby. I've watched my son become more engaged, more present, more alive in the past 2 weeks than he's been since birth. That's worth more than your outdated prejudices about rank. Kenneth leaned forward, his eyes glittering. And what happens when the pack learns that our future king's closest companion is an Omega? What message does that send? It sends the message that worth isn't determined by designation. Roman shot back. That intelligence and compassion matter more than blood status. Isn't that the kind of leadership we should be modeling? Idealistic nonsense, Kenneth muttered, but several other council members looked thoughtful. Greg Donnelly, who'd been silent until now, finally spoke. Brother, no one questions your devotion to Toby. But we have to consider the optics. The pack is already concerned about Toby's ability to rule. Adding an Omega to his inner circle will only fuel those concerns. Then the pack needs to examine their prejudices. Roman said flatly. My decision stands. Diane Fleming is Toby's nursemaid. Anyone who has a problem with that can bring it to me directly. The threat was clear. Challenge this, and you challenge me. The council members exchanged glances. Finally, the head councilman, an elderly alpha named Phil Mayer, nodded slowly. Very well, Your Majesty. But we'll be watching this situation closely. If this Omega causes any problems, she won't, Roman interrupted. Because unlike the specialists you've all recommended, she actually knows what she's doing. He turned and strode from the chambers, Harold hurrying to keep up. Once they were out of earshot, Harold let out a low whistle. You just made enemies of half the council, he observed. They were already my enemies, Roman replied. They just hide it better than Greg does. Speaking of Greg, did you see his face? He looked almost pleased. Roman had noticed. His brother's expression had been too satisfied, too smug. Greg wanted Toby to fail. Wanted Roman to make mistakes. This situation with Diane was exactly the kind of controversy Greg could exploit. Double the guard rotations near Toby's quarters, Roman ordered. And have someone keep an eye on Diane. If Greg tries anything, he won't be stupid enough to make a direct move, Harold said. But he'll definitely use this against you politically. An Alpha King elevating an Omega? The traditionalists will have a field day. Let them, Roman said grimly. My son matters more than politics. But even as he said it, he knew that in the world of pack leadership, everything was politics, and he'd just handed Greg ammunition. Diane's new room was larger than anywhere she'd ever lived. It had a real bed with clean sheets, a window overlooking the gardens, and even a small writing desk. Compared to the cramped servants' quarters where she'd shared a room with 5 other Omegas, it was a palace. But it felt like a prison. She sat on the edge of the bed, her few possessions laid out beside her. A spare dress, a hairbrush, a small wooden carving of a wolf her father had given her before he died. That was it. That was everything she owned. A knock on the door made her jump. Come in, she called, expecting Priscilla or maybe one of the other servants. Instead, Toby slipped inside, still in his nightclothes. He was barefoot, his dark hair mussed from sleep. He looked at her with those 2 old eyes, then crossed the room and climbed onto the bed beside her. Couldn't sleep? Diane asked gently. Toby shook his head. He pulled out the small chalkboard he always carried and wrote. Bad dream. Want to tell me about it? He wrote again, his letters shaky. You left. Everyone always leaves. Diane's throat tightened. Oh, sweetheart. I'm not going anywhere. I'm right here. See? She tapped the wall that separated their rooms. You're right next door. If you ever need me, just knock. Toby erased his board and wrote, Promise? I promise. She held out her pinky finger. Pinky promise. Do you know what that is? Toby nodded and linked his small pinky with hers. When you make a pinky promise, you can never break it, Diane explained. It's the most serious kind of promise there is. And I'm promising you that I won't leave unless you want me to. Toby held onto her pinky for a long moment, as if testing the strength of the promise. Then he nodded, satisfied, and curled up against her side. Diane started to hum an old Omega lullaby her mother used to sing. It was simple and repetitive, more feeling than melody. Toby's breathing gradually slowed, his body relaxing into sleep. She was about to carry him back to his own room when the door opened again. Roman stood in the doorway, clearly having come to check on his son. When he saw Toby asleep against Diane, his expression softened. He had a nightmare, Diane whispered. I was just about to bring him back. Leave him, Roman said quietly, stepping inside and closing the door. He looks peaceful. He sat in the chair by the writing desk, watching his son with an expression of longing that made Diane's heart ache. This man had everything: power, wealth, authority, but he couldn't have the one thing he wanted most, his son's trust. He'll trust you again, Diane said softly. It just takes time. How did you learn to do this? Roman asked. To read people so well? I had to. Diane stroked Toby's hair absently. When you're an Omega, your survival depends on understanding the people around you, reading their moods, anticipating their needs, staying invisible until you're needed. You learn to see people clearly because your life depends on it. Roman frowned. That's a horrible way to live. It's the only way I know. They sat in silence for a moment, the only sound Toby's soft breathing. Finally, Roman spoke again. My mate Toby's mother died giving birth to him. The labor was complicated. The healers said she was too weak, that her body couldn't handle it. She bled out within minutes. His voice was flat, emotionless, but Diane could hear the pain beneath it. Toby never cried. Not once. The healers said it was shock, but he just never started, never made a sound. You blame yourself, Diane said quietly. I should have protected her. Should have known something was wrong. Should have gotten better healers, should have. He stopped, his jaw tight. Toby's silence is my punishment, a reminder that I failed the person I was supposed to protect most. That's not true, isn't it? Roman's eyes met hers. My mate died because of me. My son won't speak because somewhere, deep down, he knows I'm responsible for killing his mother. Toby doesn't think that, Diane said firmly. He's 5 years old. He doesn't understand complicated guilt or blame. His silence has nothing to do with punishing you. Then what's it about? Diane looked down at the sleeping child in her arms. I think he's afraid of something. I don't know what yet. But fear this deep doesn't come from nowhere. Something scared him into silence, and until we figure out what, he's going to stay locked inside himself. Roman leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. Help me find it. Whatever it is, help me free him. I will, Diane promised. But Roman. She caught herself. Your Majesty. I mean, Roman is fine, when we're alone. He gave her a tired smile. I think we're past formalities now. Roman, she said carefully, testing the name on her tongue. You need to prepare yourself for the possibility that Toby might never speak, that his silence might be permanent. No. Roman's voice turned hard. I won't accept that. You might have to. He's going to be king, Roman insisted. He has to speak. The pack won't accept a mute alpha. And there it was again. The pressure, the expectations, the weight that Toby could surely feel pressing down on him every moment of every day. If you keep thinking like that, Diane said quietly, you'll never reach him. Because he'll always know that your love comes with conditions. Roman's eyes flashed. That's not fair. Maybe not. But it's true. Diane held his gaze, refusing to back down. Right now you have to choose. Do you want a son who speaks, or do you want a son who trusts you? Because I don't think you can force both. The words hung between them like a challenge. Roman stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. For a moment, Diane thought he was going to rage at her, to throw her out, to remind her of her place. Instead, he walked to the door and paused with his hand on the frame. Keep him tonight. He seems to sleep better with you. Then he was gone, leaving Diane alone with the sleeping prince and the terrible weight of responsibility settling onto her shoulders. She looked down at Toby, so small and fragile and silent. What are you so afraid of? She whispered. What happened to you? But Toby slept on, keeping his secrets locked behind walls no one had been able to breach. Not yet. Chapter 5. The Serpent's Trap. 3 weeks into the new arrangement, Diane began to notice patterns. Toby had good days and bad days. On good days, he'd engage with the lessons she prepared: simple mathematics, reading practice, nature walks through the garden where she'd teach him about plants and animals. He'd hold her hand, lean against her during story time, even attempt to smile when she made silly faces. On bad days, he'd retreat so far inside himself that nothing could reach him. He'd sit motionless for hours, staring at nothing, his small body rigid with tension. On those days, his nightmares were worse. He'd wake up screaming silently, his mouth open in a soundless cry, his eyes wild with terror. Diane started keeping a journal, documenting everything. The triggers that sent Toby spiraling, the things that brought him back. She shared it all with Roman during their evening meetings, conversations that had become the strange cornerstone of her days. Roman was changing too. Slowly, carefully, he was learning to meet Toby where he was, instead of demanding his son come to him. He'd sit with them during lessons, not interfering, just present. He'd join their walks, pointing out birds and flowers without expecting verbal responses. He'd tuck Toby in at night with stories instead of expectations. "You're doing better," Diane told him one evening after Toby had fallen asleep. They were in Roman's study, her journal open between them. "He's starting to trust you again." "Because of you," Roman said. "You're the bridge. Maybe at first. But now?" Diane smiled. "Now he's seeing you differently. Seeing that you love him for who he is, not who you need him to be." Roman rubbed his face tiredly. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, tension in his shoulders. Being Alpha King was already demanding enough without adding the emotional labor of rebuilding a relationship with his son. "The council met again today," he said. "They're getting more vocal about Toby's condition. Greg has been circulating concerns about the line of succession." Diane's stomach tightened. "What kind of concerns?" "The usual. That a mute king can't lead. That the pack needs strength, not silence. That perhaps it's time to consider alternative heirs." Roman's jaw clenched. Alternative heirs meaning Greg. He wants the throne. He's always wanted it. But he was never bold enough to move openly, until Toby's silence gave him ammunition. Roman stood and paced to the window. "I can hold him off for now, but if Toby doesn't show some kind of progress, some sign that he can eventually lead, the council will start listening to Greg's arguments." "So we're back to pressure," Diane said quietly. "Back to Toby needing to speak to be worthy." "That's not what I..." Roman stopped, catching himself. "You're right, I know you're right. But I'm caught between being his father and being a king. And those two roles are tearing me apart." Diane stood and moved to his side. She'd grown bolder in the past weeks, less afraid of overstepping. "What if there was a way to show the council that Toby can lead without speaking? What if we demonstrated his intelligence, his strategic thinking, his ability to communicate in other ways?" Roman looked at her sharply. "How?" "A test. A public one. Something that requires problem-solving and leadership, but doesn't require speech." Diane's mind raced. The idea forming as she spoke. "The council keeps dismissing Toby because they can't see past his silence, so we make them see everything else he is." "You want to put a 5-year-old on trial," Roman said slowly. "In front of the entire council. I want to give him a chance to prove himself on his own terms." Diane met his gaze. "But only if you think he's ready. And only if we prepare him properly. No surprises, no pressure. We make it a game, something he can win." Roman was quiet for a long moment, considering. Finally he nodded. "Tell me what you need." But they never got the chance to implement the plan. 2 days later, everything fell apart. Diane was in the garden with Toby, teaching him about different types of flowers. It was a good day. Toby was engaged, even picking flowers to arrange in patterns on the grass. The sun was warm, the air sweet with spring blooms. Then Greg appeared. "There you are," he said pleasantly, approaching with that smooth smile that never reached his eyes. "I've been looking everywhere for my nephew." Toby immediately went still, the flowers falling from his hands. Diane felt him press closer to her side, his small body tense. "Your Highness," Diane said carefully, standing. "Toby and I were just finishing our lesson." "Relax, Omega. I'm not here to interrupt." Greg knelt down to Toby's level, ignoring how the boy flinched back. "Hello, Toby. Your father sent me to fetch you. He needs to see you in his study." Diane's instincts screamed that something was wrong. Roman always came himself or sent Harold, never Greg. "I'll bring him," she said firmly. "No need. I can escort my own nephew." Greg's smile sharpened. "You've monopolized his time quite enough, don't you think? The boy needs to spend time with his real family." The barb hit its mark, but Diane didn't let it show. "I'm his nursemaid. It's my job too." "Your job," Greg interrupted, his voice dropping to something darker, "is whatever I say it is. Remember your place, Omega." The command in his voice, alpha power pushing against her Omega nature, made her knees weak, but she fought it, staying upright through sheer will. "I need to verify with the king first." "Are you questioning my authority?" Greg stood, towering over her. "I'm the king's brother. And you're a servant who's gotten far too comfortable with her temporary elevation." Toby grabbed Diane's hand, holding tight. When Greg reached for the boy, Toby actually hissed a sound Diane had never heard from him before. Greg's expression darkened. "Don't be difficult, Toby. Your father's waiting." But Toby shook his head violently, backing away and pulling Diane with him. "Toby, Greg's voice took on that particular alpha tone that demanded obedience. Come, here, now. Toby's whole body began to shake. His breathing came faster, shorter. Diane recognized the signs he was spiraling into a panic attack. Stop, she said urgently. You're scaring him. He needs to learn to obey. Greg snapped. This is exactly the problem. You've coddled him, made him weak, taught him that his fears matter more than his duties. Well, I'm here to fix that. He lunged forward and grabbed Toby's arm. Toby screamed a horrible, soundless scream, his mouth wide with terror. He fought wildly, kicking and scratching, completely beyond reason. Diane didn't think. She threw herself between them, shoving Greg back with strength she didn't know she possessed. Get away from him. Greg stumbled, more from surprise than force. When he recovered, his eyes were blazing with fury. You dare put your hands on me? You were hurting him. I was disciplining him. There's a difference. Greg stepped forward, his hand rising. But you? You just assaulted a member of the royal family. That's a capital offense, Omega. Diane realized her mistake too late. She'd acted on instinct, on the need to protect Toby. But she'd just given Greg exactly what he wanted. A reason to remove her from Toby's life. She started, but Greg was already calling for the guards. Seize her, he ordered when 2 guards appeared. This Omega attacked me. Take her to the holding cells. No. Diane struggled as rough hands grabbed her arms. Please. Toby needs to learn that actions have consequences, Greg said coldly. And so do you. Toby was still screaming silently, tears streaming down his face, reaching for Diane as she was dragged away. The last thing she saw before they pulled her around the corner was Greg grabbing the hysterical child, carrying him off despite his wild struggles. Like this video if you believe Diane deserves better than this. Because people like Diane need an audience that won't abandon them when power turns against them. Don't be someone who watches injustice and does nothing. Roman was in a council meeting when Harold burst through the doors, his face pale. My king, Harold said urgently. There's been an incident. Roman was on his feet immediately. Toby? He's physically unharmed, but Greg just brought him to the royal quarters. The boy is hysterical. He won't calm down, won't let anyone near him. And Greg claims... Harold hesitated. Claims what? Roman's voice was deadly quiet. That Diane attacked him in the garden, that she assaulted a royal prince in front of Toby. He's had her arrested. The room erupted, council members shouting over each other, some demanding punishment for the Omega who dared raise her hand against royalty, others questioning Greg's account. But Roman heard none of it. He was already running. He found Toby in his bedroom, curled in the corner behind his bed, rocking back and forth. The boy's face was blotchy with tears, his eyes vacant with shock. When Roman tried to approach, Toby scrambled away, pressing himself against the wall. Toby, Roman said gently, kneeling several feet away. It's me. You're safe now. But Toby just shook his head frantically, his mouth opening and closing in silent words Roman couldn't understand. Roman's heart shattered. All the progress they'd made, all the trust they'd built gone. Destroyed in a single afternoon. Where is she? Roman demanded, turning to Harold who'd followed him. Where's Diane? The holding cells, Greg ordered. Roman didn't wait to hear the rest. He stormed through the palace, his rage building with every step. Guards scrambled out of his way, sensing the fury of an alpha on the edge of control. He found Diane in one of the small cells beneath the palace cold stone rooms usually reserved for criminals and rogues. She was sitting on the narrow bench, her arms wrapped around herself, staring at nothing. When she saw him, she jumped to her feet. Roman. Toby, is he okay? Please. I need to know if he's... What happened? Roman's voice was tight with barely controlled anger. Diane explained everything quickly, Greg's arrival, his attempt to take Toby, the boy's panic, her instinctive protection. Roman listened, his fury growing with every word. You touched him, Roman said when she finished. You physically pushed a royal prince. He was hurting Toby. Diane's voice broke. I know I shouldn't have. I know it was wrong, but I couldn't just stand there and watch. You did the right thing. Diane stopped mid-sentence. What? You protected my son. When my own brother tried to traumatize him, you stood between them. Roman stepped closer to the cell bars. That's exactly what you were supposed to do. But Greg said. Greg is a manipulative bastard who saw an opportunity and took it. Roman's jaw clenched. He knew you'd react to protect Toby. He provoked you deliberately so he could have you arrested and removed from Toby's life. And I almost let him win. He grabbed the cell bars, and they groaned under the force of his grip. Harold, get these doors open, now. Your Majesty, the council will demand. I don't care what the council demands, Roman roared, his alpha power flooding the corridor and making everyone present drop their heads in submission. She's under my protection. She stays with my son. Anyone who has a problem with that can challenge me for the crown. The cell door swung open. Roman reached in and pulled Diane out, steadying her when she stumbled. She looked up at him with wide, disbelieving eyes. You're not getting rid of me? She whispered. Never. Roman's voice was fierce. You're the best thing that's happened to my son in 5 years. Greg will pay for what he did today, but right now, I need you to come with me. Toby needs you. Diane didn't need to be told twice. They ran back to Toby's room together, Harold and a contingent of guards following. When they burst through the door, Toby was exactly where Roman had left him, curled in the corner, lost in his fear. Toby, Diane called softly, dropping to her knees. Sweetheart, I'm here. I'm okay. Toby's head snapped up. When he saw her, his face crumpled. He launched himself across the room and into her arms, holding on like she was the only thing keeping him anchored to the world. Diane held him tight, rocking and humming that Omega lullaby. Gradually, slowly, Toby's breathing steadied. His death grip on her dress loosened slightly. The wild panic in his eyes faded to exhausted relief. Roman watched them, something fierce and protective rising in his chest. This Omega, this brave, foolish, beautiful Omega, had just risked everything to protect his son. She'd stood against a royal prince, faced arrest and possible execution, all for the sake of a child who wasn't even hers. She was extraordinary, and in that moment, Roman realized something that terrified him more than any battle or political maneuvering ever had. He was starting to care about Diane Fleming as more than just his son's nursemaid. He was starting to care about her as a person, as a woman, as someone worth protecting and cherishing. And no, he couldn't think like that. She was an Omega. He was an Alpha King. The gap between them was too wide, too absolute, and even if it wasn't, he'd already lost one mate. He wouldn't risk his heart again. But watching Diane comfort his son, seeing the love and care in every gentle touch and soft word, Roman knew it was already too late. The damage was done. Chapter 6. The Testimony. The emergency council session was called for the following morning. Roman had spent the night securing allies, preparing his defense of Diane, and trying to contain his rage at Greg's calculated cruelty. By the time dawn broke, he was exhausted but ready for war. Diane stood beside him in the council chambers, her head held high despite the fear radiating from her. She wore a simple dress, borrowed from one of the palace staff, still Omega clothing, but clean and presentable. Roman had wanted to dress her in something finer, but she'd refused. I won't pretend to be something I'm not, she'd said quietly. They need to see me as I am. Now, facing the 7 council members and Greg's smug expression, Roman wondered if that had been wise. The prejudice in the room was palpable. Several councilmen wouldn't even look at Diane directly, as if acknowledging her presence would somehow contaminate them. Let's proceed, Filmayer said, banging his gavel. We're here to address the incident in the garden yesterday. Prince Greg, you've brought charges against the Omega Diane Fleming for assault of a royal person. Present your case. Greg stood, every inch the wounded party. Thank you, Councilman Mayer. Yesterday afternoon, I went to the gardens to retrieve my nephew for a meeting with the king. When I arrived, I found Toby under the supervision of this Omega. He gestured dismissively at Diane. I politely informed her that the king required Toby's presence. She refused to release him. When I attempted to escort my nephew myself, as is my right as his uncle and a prince of this pack, she physically assaulted me. She pushed me with considerable force, causing me to stumble and fall. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Roman's hands clenched into fists. She also shouted at me. Greg continued, his voice taking on a wounded tone. Ordered me to get away from my own nephew. All of this in front of the child, who became understandably distressed by the violence. That's not what happened, Diane said quietly. Silence, Kenneth Schwartz barked. Omegas speak only when directly addressed by the council. Roman stepped forward, then address her. Because Greg's account is a lie, and she's the only witness. Filmayer sighed. Very well. Omega, you may speak. Tell us your version of events. Diane took a breath, steadying herself. Prince Greg came to the garden and told Toby that his father wanted to see him. But something felt wrong. The king always comes himself or sends herald. Never Prince Greg. When I questioned this, Prince Greg became aggressive. Aggressive how? Phil asked. He used Alpha Command on me, reminded me of my place. When Toby refused to go with him, when Toby showed clear signs of fear, Prince Greg grabbed the boy roughly. Toby panicked. He was screaming, fighting, completely terrified. I tried to intervene verbally, but Prince Greg wouldn't stop. So I pushed him away from Toby. You admit to the assault then? Javier Cohen said triumphantly. I admit to protecting a child who was being hurt. Diane corrected, her voice stronger now. If that's assault, then yes, I'm guilty. The arrogance, Kenneth muttered. She doesn't even show remorse. Why should she? Roman's voice cut through the chamber like a blade. She did exactly what she was supposed to do. Her job, her only job, is to protect my son. And that's what she did. Against a member of the royal family, Greg said, his eyes glittering. Brother, I understand your attachment to this Omega. She's clearly very effective at her duties, but there must be consequences for laying hands on royalty. Otherwise, what's to stop every servant from acting with such presumption? The difference, Roman said coldly, is that you provoked her deliberately. You knew Toby would panic. You knew Diane would protect him. You orchestrated this entire situation so you could have her removed from Toby's life. That's a serious accusation, Phil said carefully. Do you have proof? I have Toby's reaction. My son is still traumatized, still won't let anyone but Diane near him. Does that sound like a child who was simply being escorted to his father? Or does it sound like a child who was being terrorized? Toby is disturbed, Greg said smoothly. His reactions can't be trusted. The boy sees threats where none exist. It's part of his condition. Roman took a step toward his brother, his wolf rising. Say one more word about my son's condition, and I'll show you what a real threat looks like. Your Majesty. Phil intervened quickly. Please. Let's maintain order. We still need to hear from the other witness, Toby himself. The room went silent. You can't be serious, Roman said slowly. You want to put my 5-year-old son on trial? Force him to testify about the most traumatic event of his life? He's the only neutral witness, Kenneth pointed out. If what you and the Omega claim is true, Toby can confirm it. He can't speak, Roman said through gritted teeth. He can write. He can use gestures. We'll find a way to communicate. Phil looked genuinely regretful. I'm sorry, Roman. But this is too serious to dismiss. If Greg is lying, we need proof. And Toby is the only one who can provide it. Roman wanted to refuse. Wanted to shield his son from this circus. This political theater. That would only hurt him more. But he saw the calculation in the council members' eyes. If he refused, they'd assume he was hiding something. That Diane really had acted improperly. He looked at Diane. She met his gaze and nodded slightly, understanding. All right, Roman said finally. But on my terms. Toby testifies in a private session. Just the council, myself, Diane, and Greg. No guards. No spectators. And if at any point he becomes too distressed, we stop immediately. Phil considered, then nodded. Agreed. We'll reconvene in 1 hour. Roman found Toby in Diane's room, where the boy had insisted on sleeping the night before. He was sitting on the floor, building something with his blocks. When he saw his father, his hand stilled. Toby, Roman said gently, sitting beside him. I need to talk to you about something important. Toby reached for his chalkboard, his movements wary. The council wants to hear what happened yesterday. In the garden with Uncle Greg. Roman watched his son's face carefully. Toby's expression immediately shuttered closed. I know you don't want to talk about it, but Diane could be in serious trouble if we can't prove that she was protecting you. Toby's hands clenched around the chalk. You don't have to speak, Roman added quickly. You can write, or use gestures, or just point to yes or no. But I need you to be brave. Can you do that? For Diane? Toby looked up at him with those dark, serious eyes. Then he wrote on his board. They'll hurt her? Not if you tell them the truth. Roman's voice was firm. The council will listen to you, Toby. You're my heir. Your word carries weight. Even though I can't talk? Roman felt something crack in his chest. Even though, especially because, you're stronger than any of them understand. Toby considered this for a long moment. Then he erased his board and wrote, "I'll do it. For Diane." Roman pulled his son into a fierce hug. "You're the bravest person I know." The private session was held in a smaller chamber, more intimate than the Grand Council room. Roman sat beside Toby, with Diane on the boy's other side. The 7 council members faced them, with Greg standing slightly apart, his expression carefully neutral. Toby's hand was locked in Diane's, holding so tight his knuckles were white. "Toby," Phil said gently, "we need you to tell us what happened yesterday in the garden. Take your time. Use whatever method of communication you're comfortable with." Toby pulled out his chalkboard. His hands were shaking, but he managed to write, "Uncle Greg came to garden." "And what did he want?" Phil prompted. "Said father wanted me. But felt wrong." "Why did it feel wrong?" Toby's hand hesitated. Then he wrote, "Father always comes himself, or Harold, never Uncle Greg." Several council members exchanged glances. That was true. Roman had a very specific protocol for summoning his son. "What happened next?" Phil asked. Diane asked if it was real. Uncle Greg got angry. "Angry how?" Toby's writing became more agitated. Used alpha voice. "Scary, then grabbed me." "He grabbed you?" Javier leaned forward. "Where?" Toby pointed to his arm, then pantomimed someone yanking him roughly. "And that scared you?" Phil continued. Toby nodded frantically. Then he erased his board and wrote something that made the entire room go silent. "He hurt me before." Roman's blood turned to ice. "What?" Toby's hand was shaking so badly now that his letters were barely legible. "Lots of times, when you're gone. Says I'm broken, says I need to be fixed. Hurts me to make me talk." The board fell from Toby's hands. He was breathing too fast, on the edge of panic. Diane immediately pulled him into her arms, covering his ears and humming that lullaby. But the damage was done. Roman stood slowly, his entire body vibrating with rage. "Greg. Is this true?" "The boy is disturbed," Greg said, but there was sweat on his brow now. His imagination. "Answer me." Roman's roar shook the windows. His eyes were fully gold now, his wolf fighting for control. "Have you been hurting my son?" "I've been trying to help him," Greg insisted. "The specialists all said, sometimes children need firm discipline to overcome their." He didn't get to finish. Roman lunged across the room, his hand closing around Greg's throat and slamming him against the wall. "You hurt him," Roman snarled, his voice barely human. "You hurt my son and made him afraid. That's why he won't speak. Not because of birth trauma, not because of some mysterious condition. Because you terrorized him into silence." Greg clawed at Roman's hand, gasping. "Roman, please, I was trying to help." "By hurting a child?" Roman's grip tightened. "By traumatizing my son every time I left the palace? By making him so afraid that he locked himself inside his own mind?" "Your Majesty." Phil's voice was urgent. "Roman, please. Release him." "Why should I?" Roman's voice was deadly quiet now. "Give me one reason why I shouldn't snap his neck right here." "Because Toby is watching," Diane said softly. Roman froze. He looked back to see his son peeking out from Diane's embrace, his eyes wide with fear not of Greg, but of Roman himself. Of the violence Roman was capable of. Slowly, Roman released his brother. Greg collapsed to the floor, coughing and gasping. "You're banished," Roman said flatly. "From this pack. From this territory. From my presence. You have until sunset to gather your belongings and leave. If I ever see you again, I will kill you." "That's a promise. Not a threat." "The council," Greg wheezed. "The council just heard your victim testify," Phil said coldly. "You've been abusing the heir to the throne. That's treason, Greg. The king is being merciful by simply banishing you, but leave." Roman's command was absolute, backed by the full force of his alpha power. Greg scrambled to his feet and fled, not even daring to look back. The council members stood as one. "The charges against Diane Fleming are dismissed," Phil announced. "Furthermore, we commend her actions in protecting the young prince. The Omega acted with courage and honor." Roman barely heard them. He was already moving back to his son, dropping to his knees in front of Toby. "I'm so sorry," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I should have known. Should have protected you." I failed you, Toby. I'm so sorry. Toby looked at him for a long moment. Then, slowly, he reached out and touched his father's face. His small hand traced the tears Roman hadn't realized were falling. And for the first time in 5 years, Toby opened his mouth and made a sound. Not a word. Not yet. But a soft, wordless hum, the same melody Diane always sang to him. It was the most beautiful sound Roman had ever heard. Chapter 7. The Healing. The days following Greg's banishment were strange and fragile. The entire pack buzzed with whispers about the prince's crimes, about the Omega who'd protected the heir, about the young prince's testimony. But within the walls of the royal quarters, something quieter was happening. Toby was healing. It wasn't dramatic. There was no sudden breakthrough, no miraculous recovery. But slowly, incrementally, the walls he'd built around himself began to crumble. He started humming more often. Not words, but melodies, the lullaby Diane sang, songs from the books she read, even simple tunes he made up himself. The first time Roman heard his son humming while playing with his blocks, he'd had to leave the room to compose himself. It's progress, Diane told him that evening. They'd fallen into a routine of meeting in Roman's study after Toby was asleep, discussing the day's developments. Sound is the first step. Words will come when he's ready. How do you stay so patient? Roman asked. He was standing at the window, watching the moon rise over the Packlands. How do you have so much faith that he'll get there? Because I did. Diane was curled in the armchair by the fire, her journal open in her lap. She looked comfortable there, Roman noticed. Like she belonged. I was silent for 2 years, remember? And then one day, I just started talking. Not because someone forced me. Because I finally felt safe enough to try. What made you feel safe? Diane's expression softened with memory. Another Omega. She was older. Maybe 16 to my 9. She'd lost her family too. She understood what it was like to have words trapped inside you, desperate to get out but too afraid of what might happen if you let them. What happened to her? She died. Diane's voice was matter of fact, but Roman heard the old grief beneath it. Rogue attack 3 years later. But before she died, she taught me that silence wasn't weakness. That taking time to heal wasn't failure. That I could find my voice in my own time. And it would still be worth hearing. Roman turned from the window. You're doing that for Toby. Being what she was for you. I'm trying. Diane closed her journal. But Roman, you need to understand something. Even when Toby does start speaking, if he starts speaking, he might never be the kind of alpha who commands with words. He might always be quieter. More reserved. More comfortable with silence than speeches. The pack won't accept. The pack will accept what you teach them to accept. Diane interrupted gently. You're the Alpha King. If you show them that strength comes in many forms, they'll believe it. But only if you believe it first. Roman sat in the chair across from her, suddenly exhausted. You make it sound simple. It's not simple. It's terrifying. You're being asked to redefine everything your pack believes about power and leadership. Diane leaned forward, her eyes intense. But isn't that what great kings do? Challenge the old ways when they stop serving their people. When did an Omega become my wisest advisor? Roman asked. But there was warmth in his voice. Diane smiled. The moment you were smart enough to listen. The silence that followed was comfortable, companionable. Roman realized he looked forward to these evening conversations as much as maybe more than anything else in his day. Diane's presence had become essential. Not just for Toby, but for him. That realization should have worried him. Instead, it felt like something clicking into place. But not everyone in the pack was happy about the new status quo. The Omega servants, in particular, were torn between admiration and resentment. Diane had broken through barriers none of them had dared approach. But her success made their own limitations more obvious. She thinks she's better than us now, one Omega muttered in the servants' hall. Diane wasn't there to hear it, but Joe Shelton was. Living in the palace wing. Eating at the royal table. Spending all her time with the king. She's doing her job, Joe said sharply, taking care of the prince. Taking care of more than that. From what I hear. The Omega Lynn Donovan, one of the kitchen staff, smirked. The king spends every evening alone with her. In his study. Behind closed doors. They're discussing Toby's progress, Joe insisted, but even she couldn't keep the uncertainty from her voice. Is that what they're calling it? Lynn laughed. Come on, Joe, we all know what happens when powerful alphas take an interest in pretty Omegas. She'll warm his bed for a few months, Maybe give him another heir. Then she'll be discarded like the rest of us. Jo wanted to argue, but the words died in her throat. Because wasn't that the way of things? Omegas were useful until they weren't. Valued until someone more convenient came along. She hoped Diane was different. That her situation was different. But hope was a dangerous thing for Omegas to carry. Roman noticed the whispers. He noticed the looks his nobles gave Diane when she accompanied him and Toby to pack functions. He noticed the way conversations stopped when she entered a room. He also noticed that he didn't care. "You're courting disaster," Harold warned him one morning during training. They were in the practice ring, supposedly sparring, but really having one of their periodic arguments about Roman's decisions. The pack is already on edge about Toby. Adding an Omega to your inner circle is just giving them more ammunition. "Diane is Toby's nursemaid," Roman said, blocking Harold's strike. "There's nothing inappropriate about our relationship, isn't there?" Harold pressed his advantage, forcing Roman back. "You spend every evening alone with her. You defend her against the council. You've elevated her above her station. People are starting to wonder. Let them wonder." Roman swept Harold's legs, dropping him to the mat. "Diane is helping my son. That's all that matters." Harold looked up at him from the ground, his expression serious. "Is it? Is that really all she is to you?" Roman extended a hand to help him up, but didn't answer the question. Because he didn't have an answer. Or rather, he had one he wasn't ready to admit. The breakthrough came on a rainy afternoon 6 weeks after Greg's banishment. Diane was reading to Toby in the library a story about a young wolf learning to lead his pack. Toby was curled against her side, following along with the pictures. Roman had joined them, sitting nearby, with reports he was pretending to read while actually just watching them. And the young wolf said to his pack. Diane read, her voice soft and melodic. "Follow me not because I am the loudest, but because I will always lead with my heart." She turned the page. The end. Toby sat up, his brow furrowed. He reached for his chalkboard, but then stopped. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. "Toby?" Diane asked gently. "What is it?" Toby's face was screwed up with concentration. He was actively trying to force words out. Roman set down his reports, barely breathing. "It's okay," Diane whispered. "You don't have to." Roman's heart stopped. That was a sound, an actual sound, shaped into the beginning of a word. Toby tried again, his small hands clenching in frustration. "Mom. Mommy." The word came out rough and uncertain, like a door that hadn't been opened in years. But it was a word. A real, actual word. Diane's eyes filled with tears. "Oh, sweetheart. Yes. I'm here." But Toby shook his head. He pointed to Diane, his eyes intense with the need to be understood. Then, more clearly than before, he said it again. "Mommy." The library went absolutely silent. Diane's hand flew to her mouth, shocked. Roman stood from his chair, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might burst. Toby wasn't just making sounds, he was speaking. And his first word, his first real word in 5 years, was calling Diane his mother. "Toby," Diane whispered, tears streaming down her face now. I can't." But Toby threw his arms around her neck and said it again, clearer now, more certain. "Mommy, my mommy." Diane looked helplessly at Roman, clearly panicking about overstepping. But Roman couldn't speak, couldn't move, could only stare at his son, his beautiful, brave son who'd finally found his voice, and used it to claim the woman who'd saved him. Roman should have been jealous. Should have been hurt that Toby's first word wasn't father or daddy, but instead he felt only profound gratitude. Because Diane had given his son something Roman couldn't. Unconditional acceptance. Safety without pressure. Love without expectations. She'd given Toby a mother. "Mommy," Toby said again, this time looking at Roman as if asking permission. Asking if it was okay to want this, to need this, to love this Omega who'd pieced him back together. Roman crossed the room and knelt beside them both. "Yes," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "If that's what you want. If that's what she wants." He looked at Diane, seeing her clearly perhaps for the first time, not as a servant, not as a nursemaid, but as the woman who'd fought for his son, who'd risked everything to protect a child who wasn't hers by blood but was hers in every way that mattered. "Diane," Roman said carefully, Would you? Could you? He didn't know how to ask. Didn't know if he even had the right. She was an Omega. He was an Alpha King. The gap between them was supposed to be insurmountable. But Toby had already bridged it. Diane looked from Toby to Roman, understanding dawning in her eyes. You're asking if I'd be willing to be his mother, Roman finished. Officially, permanently, not as a nursemaid or a servant but as my mate. The words were out before he could stop them. Harold would tell him he was insane. The council would riot. The pack would never accept an Omega Queen. But looking at Diane holding his son, seeing the love in her eyes, Roman realized he didn't care about any of that. He cared about this. About them. About the family they'd already become without even meaning to. Diane stared at him, her eyes wide with shock. Roman, you can't be serious. I'm an Omega. You're the Alpha King. The council would never. The council can challenge me if they want, Roman said firmly. But they won't win. Because I've made my choice. You've been Toby's mother in every way that matters for months now. I'm just asking you to make it official. But, Mommy, please. Toby whispered, his small voice breaking. Please stay. Forever. Diane looked down at the boy in her arms. The boy who'd been silent and scared and broken when she first met him. The boy who was now speaking, who was healing, who was calling her mommy with such desperate hope in his eyes. How could she say no to that? How could she say no to any of this? Okay, she whispered. Yes. I'll stay. I'll be his mother. I'll be mine, Roman finished, his hand covering hers. Say you'll be mine. Diane met his gaze, seeing the vulnerability there, the fear that she'd reject him. The Alpha King was asking an Omega to be his equal, his partner, his mate. It was impossible. Unprecedented. Absolutely insane. Yes, Diane said, her voice stronger now. I'll be yours. Toby made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob or both. He pulled them both closer, creating a circle of three. A family that shouldn't exist, but did anyway. Outside the library, thunder rumbled, rain lashed against the windows, and inside, in the warm glow of lamplight, something new was born. Not just Toby's voice, but a family built on love instead of tradition. On choice instead of obligation. On the radical idea that an Omega could be a queen. A mute child could be a king. And love could exist anywhere it chose to bloom. Even in the most impossible places. Chapter 8. The Coronation of the Heart. The announcement was made at the next full pack gathering. Roman stood on the ceremonial platform, Toby at his side, and Diane slightly behind them, a position that would soon change. The pack had assembled in the great courtyard. Hundreds of wolves gathered to hear their king's proclamation. The air buzzed with curiosity and speculation. My people, Roman began, his voice carrying across the crowd. 5 years ago, I became a father and a widower on the same night. I thought I'd lost everything, my mate, my hope, my future. But I was wrong. He reached back and drew Diane forward. She came reluctantly, her Omega instincts screaming at her to stay invisible, to not draw this much attention. But Toby grabbed her other hand, anchoring her. This woman, Roman continued, saved my son. Not with magic or medicine, but with patience, courage, and unconditional love. She saw worth in a silent child when others saw only disability. She fought for him when I didn't know how. And today, I ask the pack to recognize what my son already knows. Diane Fleming is his mother. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some shocked, some scandalized, some genuinely confused. Furthermore, Roman said, his voice hardening with authority, I am taking Diane as my mate. She will be your Luna. Your queen. And anyone who questions her worth will answer to me directly. The silence that followed was deafening. Then, from somewhere in the crowd, a single voice called out. An Omega Queen? That's not possible. It is now, Roman said flatly. Times change, traditions evolve, and this pack will evolve with them, or be left behind. Harold stepped forward, his voice carrying. I stand with my king's choice. Diane Fleming has proven herself worthy 10 times over. Other voices joined in, mostly younger wolves, those less bound by tradition. But there were dissenters too. Older pack members shaking their heads. Nobles looking affronted. And in the back, a cluster of Omegas watching with expressions ranging from hope to envy to outright hostility. The mating ceremony will take place in 3 days, Roman announced. All are welcome to attend and witness. But understand this. My decision is final. Diane is my mate, Toby's mother, and your future Luna. Anyone who cannot accept that is free to leave the pack. He didn't wait for further objections. He took Diane's hand and led her back inside, Toby between them, leaving the pack to process the impossible thing their king had just done. The 3 days before the ceremony passed in a blur of preparation and protest. The council met in emergency session twice. Phil Mayer, to his credit, defended Roman's choice, or at least defended Roman's right to make it. But others were less accommodating. This sets a dangerous precedent, Kenneth Schwartz argued. If an Omega can become Luna, what's to stop other Omegas from demanding equality, from refusing to know their place? Maybe they should refuse, Harold shot back. Maybe their place is wherever their skills and character take them, not whatever designation they were born with. That's radical thinking, Javier Cohen said nervously. The pack hierarchy exists for a reason. It maintains order, prevents chaos. It prevents change, Phil interrupted. And sometimes change is necessary. Roman is right, times are evolving. Either we evolve with them, or we become irrelevant. The debate raged for hours. But in the end, the council couldn't override an Alpha King's choice of mate. It was one of the few absolute rights Roman possessed. They could disapprove, they could protest, but they couldn't stop it. Meanwhile, Diane was dealing with her own challenges. The Omega servants had turned on her almost completely. Only Joe Shelton still spoke to her with any warmth. The others saw her as a traitor, an Omega who'd abandoned her own kind to climb into power. You could have used your position to help us, Lynn Donovan said coldly when Diane tried to visit the servants' quarters. You have the king's ear. You could have advocated for better treatment, better conditions, actual rights. But instead, you're just thinking of yourself. That's not fair, Joe protested. Diane didn't ask for any of this. She didn't refuse it either. Another Omega, Natasha Gorman cut in. She could have said no. Could have stayed one of us. But she chose him. Chose power over solidarity. I chose Toby, Diane said quietly. Everything I've done has been for him. And now you get to be queen, Lynn said bitterly. How convenient. Diane wanted to explain that being Luna terrified her. That she'd never wanted power or status or recognition. That all she'd ever wanted was to help a scared little boy find his voice. But looking at their faces at the hurt and anger and jealousy, she realized they wouldn't believe her. She'd crossed a line. Become something other than Omega, but not quite anything else. She existed in a liminal space now, belonging nowhere. It was the loneliest she'd felt since arriving at the pack. Toby noticed her sadness. Children always did. Mommy sad, he said one evening, his voice still rough and uncertain but growing stronger each day. He was speaking in short phrases now, 2 or 3 words at a time. Each sentence was a small miracle. I'm okay, sweetheart, Diane said, forcing a smile. She was braiding his hair before bed, something that had become part of their nightly routine. No, Toby said firmly. He turned to face her, his dark eyes serious. Mommy's sad. Because of me? Never because of you. Diane pulled him into a hug. You're the best thing that ever happened to me. Then why? How could she explain to a 5-year-old that sometimes doing the right thing meant losing everything else? That love could isolate as much as it connected? Change is hard, she said finally. Even good change. People don't always understand it. Toby considered this. Then, with the simple logic of childhood, he said, they're scared. Diane blinked. What? The other Omegas. They're scared. Toby's vocabulary was limited, but his understanding wasn't. You're different now. Different is scary. Out of the mouths of babes. When did you get so wise? Diane asked, kissing his forehead. From you, Toby said simply. And Daddy. The word Daddy was new too. Toby had started using it just yesterday, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence when he saw how much it meant to Roman. The walls between father and son were crumbling day by day. Speaking of Daddy, Diane said, he wanted to come say goodnight. Should we let him? Toby nodded enthusiastically. Diane went to the connecting door and found Roman already there, waiting for permission to enter. His hesitation was endearing, this powerful alpha asking permission to see his own son. He wants you, Diane said with a smile. Roman's whole face lit up. He entered and scooped Toby into his arms, spinning him until the boy giggled another new sound, precious and rare. "Ready for bed, little warrior?" Roman asked. "Story first," Toby demanded. "The wolf one, about the king." "Which wolf king?" "There are dozens of stories." "The one who married the Omega," Toby said, grinning. "Like you and Mommy." Roman laughed. "There is no story like that. That's a new story. Our story." "Then make it up," Toby said with perfect 5-year-old logic. So Roman did. He sat on Toby's bed with his son in his lap and Diane beside them, and he spun a tale about a king who thought he had to be the strongest, the loudest, the most fearless, until he met an Omega who taught him that real strength was loving without fear, that real power was protecting without domination, and that the best kings were those who listened more than they commanded. "And they lived happily ever after?" Toby asked when the story ended. "They did," Roman confirmed, "because they chose each other, and choice is the most powerful magic of all." Toby yawned, satisfied. Roman tucked him in, and Diane kissed his forehead. Together they dimmed the lights and stepped into the hallway. "That was beautiful," Diane said quietly. "The story. It's true," Roman replied. "All of it. You've taught me more about leadership in 3 months than I learned in 12 years of being king." "I doubt that." "Don't." Roman turned to face her, his expression intense. "You showed me that strength isn't always loud, that power can be gentle, that the most important battles aren't won with claws and teeth, but with patience and love." He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his touch lingering. "You've changed everything, Diane. Not just for Toby, for me too." Diane's breath caught. They were standing close now, closer than was strictly proper. She could feel the heat radiating from his body, could see the gold flecks in his amber eyes. "Roman," she whispered. "I'm scared." "Of what?" "Of this. Of being what everyone needs me to be." "Luna, mother." "Mate, what if I can't do it? What if I fail?" "You won't," Roman said with absolute certainty. "But even if you stumbled, even if you made mistakes, I'd be there to catch you. That's what mates do." He leaned closer, his forehead resting against hers. "You're not alone in this, Diane. You'll never be alone again." The kiss, when it came, was inevitable. Soft at first, tentative, as if they were both testing the reality of this impossible thing between them. Then deeper, more certain, as Roman's hand cupped her face and Diane's fingers tangled in his hair. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Roman smiled. "2 more days," he said. "And then you're mine forever." "I'm already yours," Diane whispered. "I have been since the moment I chose to protect your son. Then in 2 days we make it official." Roman kissed her forehead, then reluctantly stepped back. "Sleep well, my future Luna." He left her in the hallway, and Diane touched her lips, still feeling the ghost of his kiss. She was terrified and exhilarated, and completely overwhelmed, but she was also certain of one thing. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they'd face them together. Her, Roman, and Toby. A family forged not by blood or tradition, but by choice and love, and the radical belief that anyone could be anything if given the chance to prove it. The night before the ceremony, Diane couldn't sleep. She stood at her window, watching the moon paint silver patterns on the gardens below. Tomorrow she would become Luna. Tomorrow, everything would change. A soft knock made her turn. Joe Shelton stood in the doorway, holding something wrapped in cloth. "I know you probably don't want to see any of us," Joe said quietly, "but I couldn't let you go into tomorrow without this." She handed Diane the bundle. Inside was a dress, simple but beautiful, made from Omega spun fabric in traditional wedding white. It must have taken weeks to create. "Joe," Diane breathed. "Did you?" "Not just me. Some of the others help too, the ones who don't hate you." Joe smiled sadly. "We're not all like Lynn. Some of us understand what you're doing, what you're proving, that we're more than they've told us we are." Tears pricked Diane's eyes. "Thank you. Be a good Luna," Joe said fiercely. "Be the kind of queen who remembers where she came from, who fights for the ones still at the bottom. Can you do that?" "I can try," Diane promised. "That's all anyone can ask." Joe hugged her quickly, then was gone, leaving Diane alone with the dress and the weight of tomorrow. She held the fabric to her chest and made herself a vow. She would be a Luna who remembered, who fought, who changed things not by forgetting her Omega roots, but by honoring them. Tomorrow, she would become a queen. But she would never stop being the Omega girl who'd learned that compassion was its own kind of power. Chapter 9. The Challenge. The mating ceremony was scheduled for sunset in the Great Hall. A symbolic time when day met night, when light merged with darkness, when impossible things became possible. Diane woke before dawn, her stomach churning with nerves. She wore the dress Joe had brought her, and when she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. Not because the dress transformed her, it was simple, almost plain, but because of the expression on her face. She looked like someone who belonged. A knock sounded at her door. "Come in," she called, expecting Joe or maybe one of the other servants. Instead, Roman entered, still in his sleep clothes, his hair mussed. "I know I'm not supposed to see you before the ceremony," he said. "But I needed to check that you hadn't run away." "I'm not running," Diane said, though the thought had crossed her mind a dozen times during the sleepless night. Roman crossed to her and took her hands. "Last chance. If you want to back out, I'll understand. I'll protect you regardless. You and Toby can stay here. And no one will force you into anything." "You're giving me an out?" Diane asked. "On our wedding day?" "I'm giving you a choice," Roman corrected. "Because that's what love is. Choosing each other every day, not because you have to, but because you want to." Diane squeezed his hands. "I choose this. I choose you. I choose Toby. I'm scared out of my mind, but I'm not running." Relief flooded Roman's features. He pulled her into an embrace, breathing in her scent. "Then tonight, you become my mate. My Luna. My equal. Your Majesty." Harold's urgent voice came from the hallway. "We have a problem." Roman reluctantly released Diane and opened the door. Harold stood there, his face grim. "The council has called an emergency session. They're demanding it happen before the ceremony." "Of course they are," Roman muttered. "What now?" "Kenneth Schwartz has invoked the right of challenge." The words fell like stones. Diane didn't know exactly what that meant, but Roman's expression told her it was bad. "He can't," Roman said flatly. "I'm the Alpha King. Who could he possibly?" "Not to you," Harold interrupted. "To her. He's challenging Diane's right to become Luna." The blood drained from Diane's face. "How is that even possible?" "It's an old law," Roman said, his voice tight with fury. "If a significant portion of the pack questions a Luna's worthiness, they can demand she prove herself through a series of trials. Physical, mental, and spiritual tests to demonstrate she's capable of leading. And if she fails?" Diane asked, though she already knew the answer. "Then the mating is forbidden. The council can block it." Roman turned to Harold. "How many council members signed on to this challenge?" 4 out of 7. Kenneth, Javier, and 2 others. Phil tried to block it, but he doesn't have the votes. Roman's hands clenched into fists. "This is Kenneth's revenge for me dismissing the charges against Diane. He's been planning this." "What are the trials?" Diane asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "That's up to the council to design," Harold said. "But traditionally they test strength, wisdom, and connection to pack bonds, things that—" He hesitated. "Things that Omegas typically fail," Diane finished. "Because we're not supposed to have those qualities." "You do have them," Roman insisted. "You're stronger than half my warriors, smarter than most of the council. And Toby loves you more than anyone. You can pass these trials." "Can I?" Diane looked at him, her fear finally showing. "Or are they designed to make me fail? To prove that an Omega can never be Luna?" The question hung between them, ugly and true. "Then we'll prove them wrong," Roman said fiercely. "We'll show them exactly what you're capable of." The council chamber was packed. Not just the 7 council members, but dozens of high-ranking pack members all gathered to witness the challenge. Diane stood before them in her wedding dress, feeling exposed and vulnerable. Kenneth Schwartz rose, his expression falsely sympathetic. "Omega Diane Fleming, you stand before this council as a candidate for the position of Luna, the highest honor our pack can bestow upon a female. However, concerns have been raised about your suitability for this role." "Concerns?" Roman growled from where he stood beside Diane. "You mean prejudices?" "We mean questions," Kenneth continued smoothly. "Questions about whether someone of Omega designation possesses the necessary qualities to lead. To address these questions, we invoke the right of challenge. 3 trials, administered over the course of today. Pass all 3, and you may proceed with the mating ceremony. Fail even one, And the ceremony is forbidden. What are the trials? Phil Mayer asked. At least he looked genuinely unhappy about this. The first trial, Kenneth announced, tests physical strength and courage. The candidate must face a trained warrior in single combat and last 3 minutes without submitting. Gasps rippled through the chamber. That was nearly impossible for any Omega. Their builds were smaller, their strength lesser, their instincts oriented toward submission rather than dominance. That's not a test, Harold protested. That's a setup for failure. It's traditional, Javier Cohen said. Every Luna in our history has proven she can defend herself and her pack. Why should this candidate be different? Because she's an Omega, Diane thought bitterly. Because you designed this to be impossible. I'll do it, she said aloud, her voice clear. Who's my opponent? Kenneth smiled. That would be Clifford Monroe, one of our finest warriors. A massive man stepped forward from the crowd, easily twice Diane's size. Scarred and battle-hardened. He looked at her with something like pity. I don't want to hurt you, Cliff said quietly. Then don't, Diane replied, though her heart was hammering. Just give me 3 minutes. The combat circle was cleared. Roman tried to pull her aside to strategize, but there was no time. Kenneth was already calling for the trial to begin. You don't have to do this, Roman whispered urgently. I'll challenge the council's authority. No, Diane said firmly. If I back down now, they'll always see me as weak. I have to face this. Then be smart, not strong, Roman advised. Cliff is powerful, but he's also slow. Use that. Diane nodded and stepped into the circle. Cliff entered from the other side, rolling his shoulders. The crowd pressed close, eager to see the Omega fail. Begin, Kenneth called. Cliff lunged immediately, clearly hoping to end this quickly and mercifully. But Diane had learned a few things about survival in her years as an Omega: how to read body language, how to anticipate attacks, how to make herself small and untouchable. She ducked under his first strike, rolled away from his second. The crowd murmured with surprise. Stand and fight, someone called. But Diane didn't need to fight, she just needed to survive. For 3 minutes, she could dodge anything. Cliff came at her again, faster this time. His fist grazed her shoulder, spinning her around. Pain bloomed. But she kept moving, kept dodging, kept breathing. 2 minutes left. Cliff was getting frustrated. He feinted left, then grabbed right, catching her arm. Diane felt the strength in his grip, felt how easy it would be for him to pin her, to force her submission. But she remembered Toby. Remembered the little boy who'd been hurt by someone bigger and stronger, who'd needed someone to stand between him and violence. She bit Cliff's hand, not hard enough to truly injure, but enough to shock him into releasing her. Then she kicked at his knee, making him stumble. Clever, Cliff muttered, a hint of respect in his voice. 1 minute left. The crowd was roaring now, divided between those cheering for her and those demanding Cliff crush her. Diane's lungs burned. Her muscles screamed. But she kept moving, kept evading, kept refusing to submit. Time! Phil's voice rang out. Diane collapsed to her knees, gasping. She'd done it. 3 minutes, no submission. The chamber erupted in chaos, some celebrating, others protesting that she hadn't truly fought. But Kenneth couldn't deny the rules had been met. The first trial is past, Phil announced. Barely. Roman rushed into the circle, pulling Diane to her feet and into his arms. You're incredible, he breathed. I'm exhausted, she corrected. But she was smiling through the pain. 1 down, Harold said, appearing at their side. 2 to go. Diane's smile faded. The day was far from over. The second trial was announced immediately. No time to rest, no time to recover. Kenneth was making sure she faced each challenge at her weakest. The second trial tests wisdom and judgment, Kenneth said. The candidate will be presented with a scenario, a pack crisis, and must make a decision that serves the greater good. Her choice will be judged by the council. This was more abstract, harder to fight. Diane's mind raced as Kenneth laid out the scenario. A sickness has swept through the pack. Resources are limited, medicine enough for either the warriors who defend us or the elderly who cannot contribute labor. As Luna, you must decide who receives the medicine. Speak your choice. It was a trap. Choose the warriors, and she'd look heartless. Choose the elderly, and she'd appear to value sentiment over practicality. The chamber fell silent, waiting. Diane closed her eyes, thinking. Then she opened them and spoke clearly. I'd give the medicine to the healers. Confused murmurs. What? Kenneth demanded. You said resources are limited, that means we need people who can multiply our efforts. Healers can treat more people with less medicine if they're healthy. They can find alternatives, stretch supplies, save both groups. Diane's voice grew stronger. A wise Luna doesn't choose sides. She finds a third option that serves everyone. Phil was nodding slowly. Even some of the hostile council members looked impressed. That's unconventional, Kenneth said, clearly thrown. It's smart, Phil countered. She's right. Protecting the healers protects everyone. The second trial is passed, Phil announced before Kenneth could argue further. 2 down. 1 to go. The final trial was the cruelest. The third trial, Kenneth said with barely concealed satisfaction, tests the bond between Luna and Pack. The candidate must receive the acceptance of the Pack's wolves. Their inner beasts must recognize her as their leader. If the majority of wolves present reject her, she fails. This was the trial that would destroy her, because Omega wolves were wired to submit, not to lead. And Alpha wolves rarely accepted Omega authority. How many must accept me? Diane asked quietly. More than half of those present, Kenneth gestured to the packed chamber. At least 40 wolves. Diane looked at the sea of faces, nobles, warriors, servants. Most looked skeptical at best, hostile at worst. How could she possibly win their wolves' acceptance? You have 1 hour, Kenneth said. Use it to prove yourself worthy. And with that, Diane's final trial began. Chapter 10. The Omega Queen. 1 hour to win the hearts of 40 wolves. Diane stood in the center of the great hall, surrounded by skeptical faces and hostile energy. She had no weapons, no authority, no advantage except the truth of who she was. Roman started to step forward, to speak on her behalf, but Diane held up a hand, stopping him. No, she said quietly. This has to be me. Only me. She took a deep breath and began to speak not to the people, but to their wolves. To the primal, instinctive parts of them that recognized truth when they heard it. I am Omega, she said simply. I won't pretend otherwise. I'm not the strongest fighter. I'm not the fiercest warrior. I don't have alpha blood or noble lineage. Everything about my designation says I shouldn't be standing here. The chamber was silent, listening. But I'm also a survivor. I lost my family to rogues when I was 7. I went silent for 2 years because the pain was too much to speak. I lived as a servant, invisible and powerless, because that's what Omegas do. We survive in the spaces between other people's notice. Diane's voice grew stronger. And then I met a little boy who was silent too, who was drowning in expectations and fear. And I realized something. Silence isn't weakness. It's not failure or brokenness. Sometimes silence is how we protect ourselves until we're strong enough to speak. She looked directly at the crowd. Toby taught me that. And I taught him that his voice, whenever he was ready to use it, mattered. That he mattered, not because of his title or his destiny, but because he was himself. A brave, brilliant, beautiful boy who deserved love without conditions. Movement in the crowd. Diane pressed on. That's what I believe a Luna should be. Not the strongest or the loudest, but the one who sees every member of the pack, even the invisible ones. Even the Omegas who scrub your floors and wash your dishes and exist only to serve. Even the children who don't fit the mold. Even the broken ones who need time to heal. She turned slowly, making eye contact with as many people as possible. I can't promise I'll be a traditional Luna. I can't promise I'll always make the choices you expect. But I can promise this. I will fight for every single member of this pack, the powerful and the powerless, the alphas and the omegas. Because a pack is only as strong as its weakest member, and for too long, we've pretended weakness doesn't exist among us. Her eyes found the Omega servants clustered in the back. Jo was there, tears streaming down her face. Even Lynn looked conflicted. I see you, Diane said to them. All of you. And when I'm Luna, I will make sure everyone else sees you too. She turned back to face Kenneth and the council. So yes, I'm Omega. And maybe that's exactly what this pack needs, someone who remembers what it's like to be powerless, so she never abuses the power she's given. Someone who knows that strength comes in many forms, and the quietest voice can sometimes speak the loudest truth. Diane spread her arms wide. I'm ready. Let your wolves judge me. But know this. I'm not asking for your acceptance because I think I'm better than other Omegas. I'm asking for it because I believe every Omega deserves the chance to be more than we've been told we can be. And if I fail this trial, if your wolves reject me, at least I'll have tried. At least I'll have shown one little boy that fighting for what you believe in, even when the whole world says you're not enough, is always worth it. She closed her eyes and opened herself up to the pack bonds, those invisible threads that connected every wolf to every other. As an Omega, she'd spent her life trying to make those bonds as small and unnoticeable as possible. Now she let them expand, let herself be seen and felt by every wolf in the room. See me, she called to them through the bond. All of me. The fear and the courage, the pain and the hope. I'm not perfect, but I'm real, and I will love this pack with everything I have. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Wolf after wolf reached back through the bond, not with dominance or aggression, but with recognition, with acceptance, with the acknowledgement that she was one of them, regardless of designation. She felt Joe's wolf first, bright and fierce and loyal, then other Omega wolves, emboldened by her words, then warriors who'd seen her face Cliff with courage, then parents who understood what she'd done for Toby. The bonds multiplied, spreading through the room like wildfire. 50 wolves, 60, 70. And then, strongest of all, she felt Roman's wolf powerful and protective and utterly devoted. And Toby's small, tentative wolf, still learning but unshakably certain that she was his. When Diane opened her eyes, the chamber had transformed. Wolves were everywhere, some had partially shifted, eyes glowing with their beasts, and every single one was looking at her with acceptance. Phil Mayer stood, his voice ringing with authority. The pack has spoken, count the acceptances. Harold moved through the crowd, tallying. When he finished, he looked at Kenneth with satisfaction. 73 wolves accept her. The trial is passed. Kenneth's face went purple with rage. This is irregular. The bonds were influenced by emotion. Not, the bonds don't lie. Phil interrupted sharply. Wolves recognize true leadership, regardless of designation. Diane Fleming has proven herself worthy in all 3 trials. The challenge is satisfied. He turned to Diane and, for the first time, bowed to her. Luna Diane Fleming. The pack accepts you. The chamber erupted. Some in celebration, some in protest, but the majority in acceptance. Diane's knees buckled. And Roman was there instantly, catching her. You did it, he whispered in her ear. You magnificent, impossible woman, you did it. Toby broke free from Harold's hold and ran to them, throwing himself into Diane's arms. Mommy won, he cried, his voice clear and joyous. Mommy's the queen. Diane held him tight, tears streaming down her face. We won, she corrected. All of us. Everyone who's ever been told they weren't enough. The mating ceremony happened at sunset as planned, but it was different now, grander, more meaningful. Diane walked down the aisle between rows of pack members, not alone as tradition dictated, but with Toby holding one hand and Joe Shelton holding the other. Behind them came a procession of Omegas, no longer invisible, walking with their heads high. Roman stood at the altar, his eyes never leaving Diane's face. When she reached him, he took her hands and spoke the ancient vows, but he added his own words too. I take you not because tradition allows it, but because love demands it. I take you not as a lesser, but as an equal. I take you knowing that you will challenge me, change me, and make me better than I ever could be alone. Diane's voice was steady as she replied. I take you not because you're powerful, but because you're kind. I take you not because you're a king, but because you're a father who learned to love without conditions. I take you knowing that together, we'll build something new. Something better. The pack elder stepped forward to complete the ceremony. By the power of the moon and the bonds of the pack, I declare you mated, Alpha King Roman Terry and Luna Diane Fleming. May your union bring strength to our pack and hope to our future. As Roman kissed her, sealing the bond that would tie them together for life, Diane felt something shift in the very fabric of the pack. The rigid hierarchies, the strict designations, the invisible walls that separated Omega from Alpha, all of it began to crack. It would take years to truly change. Generations, maybe. But this moment was the beginning. The proof that love could exist anywhere, that worth wasn't determined by birth, and that sometimes the most powerful thing you could do was choose compassion over tradition. 3 months later, Toby stood before the gathered pack, preparing to give his first public speech. He was 6 now, still small for his age, still quiet more often than not. But when he spoke, people listened. "My name is Toby Terry," he said, his voice soft but clear. "I'm the heir to the Silvercrest pack. And I used to think that meant I had to be loud and strong and perfect all the time." He paused, looking at Diane and Roman standing nearby. "But my parents taught me something different. They taught me that strength comes in many forms, that silence can be powerful, that the bravest thing you can do is be yourself, even when the world says you should be someone else." The pack listened, rapt. "I still don't talk as much as other kids," Toby continued. "Sometimes words are hard, sometimes silence feels safer, but I'm learning that's okay. That I can be a good prince, maybe even a good king someday without being like everyone else. Because the best leaders are the ones who understand what it's like to struggle, who remember what it's like to need help, who use their power to lift others up instead of pushing them down." He looked directly at the crowd of Omegas who'd gathered to hear him, Joe and Lynn and Natasha and dozens of others. "My mother is Omega. She's also the strongest person I know. She fought for me when no one else did. She taught me that worth isn't about designation or bloodline. It's about character, and anyone can have that." The applause when he finished was thunderous. Diane wiped tears from her eyes while Roman pulled both of them into a fierce hug. "Our son," he murmured. "Our brilliant, brave, perfect son. Our pack," Diane corrected, gesturing to the crowd where Omegas and Alphas stood side by side, united by a 6-year-old's words. "Look what we're building." Roman looked, and he saw it, the beginning of real change. Omega children who believed they could be more than servants. Alpha warriors who'd learned to respect strength. That didn't come from physical dominance. A pack that was slowly, painfully, beautifully learning to value every member. It wasn't perfect. There was still resistance, still prejudice, still those who believed the old ways were best. But the foundation had been laid, the first stones of a new structure that would take years to complete. And it had all started with a mute boy who finally found his voice, and an Omega who dared to believe she was worth more than the world told her she was. 5 years later, the anniversary celebration of Roman and Diane's mating was held in the Great Hall, but it was different from any royal celebration the pack had ever seen. Omegas sat at the high table alongside Alphas. Children, regardless of designation, trained together in leadership and combat. And at the center of it all sat the royal family. Roman, still strong but softer now, tempered by love. Diane, confident in her role as Luna, her voice carrying weight and authority. And Toby, 11 years old and already showing signs of the king he would become. He still spoke less than other children his age. But when he did speak, his words carried the wisdom of someone who'd learned that silence could teach as much as sound. "Mother," Toby said during a quiet moment in the celebration, "do you ever regret it, becoming Luna? All the challenges and the fighting and the people who still don't accept you?" Diane looked at her son, this beautiful boy who'd given her purpose when she had none, who'd called her mommy and changed her entire world. "Never," she said firmly. "Not for a single moment. Even though it's hard. Especially because it's hard." Diane smiled. "The things worth having are always hard, Toby. Love is hard. Change is hard. Standing up for what you believe in is hard. But that's what makes them matter." Toby nodded, understanding. Then he grinned a rare, brilliant expression that made him look exactly like his father. "When I'm king, I'm going to make you my chief advisor. The first Omega on the Royal Council. The pack might have something to say about that," Diane warned. But she was smiling too. "Then they can say it." Toby replied with the confidence of a prince who'd learned that his voice, however it chose to express itself, was worth hearing. "Because I learned from the best that sometimes you have to do the impossible thing, even when everyone says you can't." Roman joined them, pulling them both into an embrace. "My family," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "My incredible, impossible, perfect family." And standing there in the Great Hall, surrounded by a pack that was slowly learning to be better, Diane realized something. She'd spent so much of her life trying to be invisible, trying not to take up space, trying to fit into the small box the world had made for Omegas. But she wasn't small anymore. She was Luna, mother, queen. And she would spend the rest of her life making sure that every Omega child in the pack knew they could be big too, that they could dream impossible dreams and fight impossible battles and win. Because if a mute prince could find his voice, and an Omega could become queen, then anything, absolutely anything, was possible. Epilogue: The Legacy. 20 years later, King Toby Terry stood before his pack on the day of his coronation. His father had stepped down peacefully, choosing to spend his remaining years with his mate rather than clinging to power. It was unprecedented, but then, the Terry family had made a habit of doing unprecedented things. Toby's voice was still quiet as he addressed his people. But every wolf in the territory leaned in to hear him, because they'd learned that the softest voices sometimes carried the most important messages. "When I was 5 years old," Toby said, "I couldn't speak. I was trapped in silence, convinced that if I opened my mouth, something terrible would happen. My uncle had hurt me, terrorized me, made me believe that my voice was dangerous." The crowd was completely silent, hanging on every word. But then an Omega servant, a woman named Diane Fleming, saw me. Really saw me. She didn't try to fix me or force me or make me into something I wasn't. She just loved me, patiently, unconditionally, until I felt safe enough to try. Toby's eyes found his mother in the crowd. Diane was older now, silver threading through her dark hair, but still strong, still fierce, still the woman who'd changed everything. My mother taught me that leadership isn't about being the loudest or the strongest. It's about seeing the people others ignore, fighting for those who can't fight for themselves, using whatever power you have to lift others up. He paused, letting the words sink in. That's the kind of king I want to be. Not because my designation demands it, but because my mother showed me what real strength looks like. And today, I honor her legacy by announcing my first royal decree. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Effective immediately, pack designation will no longer determine a wolf's opportunities. Omegas will be eligible for the Royal Council, for warrior training, for any position their skills and character qualify them for. We will judge wolves by their actions, not their birth. The hall erupted, some in celebration, some in protest. But Toby's voice cut through the chaos. This pack was built on the idea that some wolves are worth more than others. But my mother proved that idea wrong. And I will spend my reign making sure every wolf in this pack knows their worth, regardless of designation, regardless of voice, regardless of anything except their willingness to contribute to something bigger than themselves. He raised his voice for the first time, letting his alpha power ring through the hall. "I am King Toby Terry, son of Alpha Roman and Luna Diane, and I declare that the age of Omega oppression is over. We rise together, or we fall apart. The choice is yours." The response was thunderous. Not universal change never was, but enough. Enough Omegas cheering, enough Alphas nodding, enough wolves ready to believe in a new way forward. Diane stood watching her son claim his throne, and she felt Roman's hand slip into hers. "We did it," he whispered. "We actually did it." "No," Diane corrected, squeezing his hand. "Toby did it. We just showed him it was possible. By being impossible ourselves," Roman added with a smile. They stood there together, the former Alpha King and his Omega Queen, watching their son reshape the world they'd brought him into. It wasn't perfect, it never would be. But it was better, and better was enough. Because 25 years ago, a mute 5-year-old boy had run to an Omega servant and whispered, "Mommy." And that single word had changed everything. It had proven that love could exist anywhere. That worth wasn't determined by designation, that the smallest voice could echo through generations. And that sometimes, the most powerful thing you could do was simply see someone really see them and love them exactly as they were. That was the legacy of Luna Diane Fleming. And it would endure long after she was gone.